Welcome to Scaffolding Student-Facing AI Tools into Your Classroom Practice. I'm your host, Aaron Makelky. I want to thank Skilling Future for inviting me to present at this conference. As a world history teacher, this is awesome to have people literally from across the world coming and learning how to use technology, AI in action, tool stories, and innovation shaping K-20 education. I am a high school teacher. I'm also an AI integration consultant. Let's jump into it. If you want to get the follow-up to this presentation, it's hard to teach you everything you need to know in 30 minutes. You can scan this QR code. It will give you a name, email, and I will send you the slides, this video, some lesson examples, a syllabus, chats from my students, and then my contact info if you have any other questions for me. I'll have this slide again at the end. Who am I and how did I get into this? It actually started with someone encouraging me to teach outside of my classroom. I started making TikTok videos at the request of my wife, and I had a video kind of go viral. It's in the tens of millions of views now about my students' cell phones. And then that kind of forced me on this path, I guess, of being a content creator around what I was already doing in my classroom. I'm still in the classroom. I teach world history every day in a kind of suburban school in Wyoming. It's right in the middle of the country where there's more bison and antelope than there are people. And one of my big things this school year has to be more intentional about how I use and teach my students to use AI tools versus experimenting and learning and being open-ended. That's what you're going to learn in this presentation. If you're a teacher, a professor, or anyone who coaches or facilitates teachers, this is for you. Admin, not so much unless you want to encourage your teachers to use these tools, but it's how do we get these in front of our kids and get them to use them responsibly and effectively. What are you going to get out of this session with me? We're going to have a step-by-step process on how you can get your students to use generative AI tools intentionally, not haphazardly, not randomly or experimentally. And then I want you to have the resources and a network to support the use, because you're going to go back in your room excited, you're going to try something, and we'll talk about mindset, but it's not always going to work. So I want you to have someone like me or my website or those emails I'll send you or other people in the chat who can support you in that process. The agenda and pacing, which will be on the bottom of every slide for the rest of this, we're going to hit 4 parts around AI tools for our students: policy, tools, skills, which will be our focus, and then application, which will mix in with the skills. So what does this skill look like in a real student assignment? All of my screenshots are from my students' work. It's nothing that I went and created for this presentation. So background info, context, what do you need to know? As a teacher, here's what we need you to be up to speed on. What do I need to know about AI myself to be able to get my students to use it effectively? And by the way, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to use it more than them. Do you have policies in place that support student AI use? If you don't have any policies, do you have the support of your evaluator and administrator to do so? What tools do you need to be able to do that? And then what does intentional student AI use even look like? These are my philosophies. This is probably the slide where you're going to say, yes, let's go, or switch to a different session. I'm good either way. But we should always start with, what are we learning? We're not learning AI. We're using AI to help us learn something in our curriculum, a skill, some content that fits into my course, and AI is part of the process. It's not the final product. I am big on being tool agnostic. You should not be invested in a single ecosystem. I'll show you examples of why not and how I got burned by one. You want to have the skills that transfer against any tools. You want to focus on fundamentals. If I can just get my students good at prompting, that takes care of a lot of the other things that my students will be able to do with AI tools. But if they don't have those fundamentals, relying on these other tools to do it for them is a long-term losing game. I am also not a believer in AI literacy. Literacy is literacy. Giving instructions and being clear and giving context is a universal skill, whether I'm typing it into ChatGPT or I'm saying that to my students or a coworker or an assistant. human or AI, it's all the same. And a lot of people make things more complicated than they need to be. That's really the root of AI literacy. Finally, you should expect abuses by your students. Like, they will go beyond what you want them to do. They will break things. They will be inappropriate because they are students. And they do the same with paper pencil. We just have to expect this. You're going to have failures. I've had lessons fail spectacularly that were a complete, disaster. And you're going to be frustrated. As long as we can accept those as we go into this process, we won't just get angry and quit and slam our laptops shut. If those sound good, then let's go and let's figure out how can we get our students using AI tools intentionally. The first stage, and you'll see at the bottom, we're on the policy part, is to make sure that levels of policy support what you're doing. While we can look at the big picture ones from the state, the university, maybe the school district, very few of those where I am have policies about generative AI tools. They just say our acceptable use policy, our typical technology stuff are already in place, and we don't need to make those. So going down a level, what about your school? So that might be your university, or if you're in a school district like I am, my building has a handbook for staff and a handbook for students. Is there anything in there that would keep me from using these tools with my students? Parental permission? Is there an age limit? In the US, that's usually 13. Do they have to do so through their school account? So like a school Google Apps for Education email is the only one you can use for tools in my building. You need to know that that's in place or not for you. And then finally, and most importantly, is your own syllabus. Are you addressing it there? Because I hear this all the time. Teachers tell me, my school doesn't have a policy. My university doesn't have a policy. Yeah, but you have almost complete control over your syllabus as long as you're getting it approved by your evaluator. What are you saying in there about students using AI tools? If you're not saying anything, they're using it. So we should address that. An example for me, the state that I'm in, Wyoming, has State Department of Education guidelines. They recommend these are the ways that students should be learning to use AI. That doesn't mandate or compel anyone to do anything, but I use that as justification. If someone walks in my room and says, "Why are you teaching this?" I point to those and say, "I'm right here on the scale, and that's what my state recommends I be doing." My district and school handbooks don't have anything precluding students from using generative AI tools. My own syllabus, which when you put your email in at the end of this, I'll show you how I address it, makes it very explicit how students can and cannot use AI tools in their work. What do those Department of Ed guidelines look like? You can copy these, and there are lots of different versions. The stoplight is a common one I see. I don't like the stoplight. The red sort of infers that it's bad to not use AI. That's usually AI free. And then the green is usually at the bottom, like more AI is better. That is not always the case, especially not right away when you're scaffolding this in intentionally. Wyoming came up with these. In one word, no AI. Use AI to advise you. Use AI alongside. So I'm writing with AI. I'm researching with AI. And then AI empowered is basically that AI takes the lead and is doing things I couldn't do on my own. You should have something like this in place. If your school or district or university doesn't, steal this one. Send me an email. I can give you the whole 8 or 9 pager from the Wyoming Department of Ed that supports this. Now, we're at the point where I want to hear from you in the chat, whether it's policy in a handbook or a professional development training, or even just a one-on-one meeting with your administrator or evaluator. What AI guidance have you received so far as an educator? I haven't had any. I'm self-taught and self-directed, which is part of the fun of this, and I learn from other people that are way smarter than me. But tell me in the chat, what AI guidance have you received so far in the last 2 years since ChatGPT came out? What does that look like for you? The next thing is being transparent. What we do in my classroom practice and my syllabus is we treat AI use like any other source. When students use it, they cite it. MLA and APA actually have guidelines for doing so. What I say is I need a short disclaimer of what tool you used and how, and then I need a link to any chats. I do the same. If I use AI to help me on my side as an instructor, I will tell students in the assignment, I use ChatGPT to help me brainstorm this. If I email somebody and I used AI, I disclose, here's the tool I used and how. Sometimes I will even put a link to the chat. Why would we put a link to the chat? I am telling you, if you only do one thing from this presentation, my good friend Mike Kentz sort of taught me this trick last summer. It is like having X-ray vision into your students' thinking. Here is a real screenshot of what my students did. They are in a world history class. They're learning about the Sepoy Rebellion. And they went in and the smaller bubble explained to me the significance of Oud to the Sepoy Rebellion. That was their whole prompt. And then they followed up with, what was the significance of the Oud region to the Indians? Submit. I don't need to read the output from the AI most of the time. I just read what my students input, and I can tell how well they know the content, what sequence they're following through on their assignments, what are they looking at chunk by chunk, and process better than just looking at a Google Docs edit history. Now, if that's the, oh man, this student does not understand the content version, here's a prompt from a student in the same class on the same assignment, giving great context. This does not just show they know how to use AI. They do. They know how to use AI as a tool to get them to the end result, which is coming up with a framework and getting feedback on their writing for this essay. I don't need to look at what the AI spit out. I'm just looking at what the student showed me. And when they're transparent with their use, it's a great tool. You can even grade those chats, but at the very least, you can see inside their head and follow the process of them coming up with their ideas. The other thing that I started doing this year, and this is a screenshot of the actual example, is I log these and I grade them for myself. A+ is, wow, this kid is doing awesome, and they understand the content, and then I go all the way down to F. I label what tool did they use, what topic were they using on, and the grade. That way you have exemplars to show students. Do it like this. You also have guardrails. This is a bad example. Don't do that. You can even put those side by side and have students look at them and give feedback. You can also share those with other educators and then grade them for your own purposes or for the student. Tell me in the chat, how do you enforce AI use in your practice? Do you have policies around that? Are you a no AI? It's up to the students? Do you explicitly say? Do you use AI detection tools? What does that look like in your practice currently around enforcing AI use? While you're putting that in the chat, we're going to roll ahead to the tools section. What do I need to have, and what do my students need to have to be able to use AI tools intentionally? I just have a series of 4 questions, and you can write these down in the note guide, or you can watch the recording later. First question is it blocked for staff or for students? You're probably going to want to use the same tool yourself as your students use. You're definitely going to want them to have access. And don't assume because it's available at the start of the semester that it's always going to be available. These change frequently, at least where I work. So you're going to want to update them quarterly or intermittently at least. If it's not blocked for your students or yourself, what does your team or your school use? So that could be your PLC, your department, your college. Do you have a site license for a tool where they pay for something? Some schools even require you to use that generative AI tool since they're paying for it and they don't allow you to use it on a personal account. My district doesn't provide one. My teams don't really use AI, or we're all kind of haphazard, but it's always easier to learn a tool alongside the colleague next to you or the person you share an office with so that you can bounce ideas and share what you've learned with them. The next question for selecting tools is, what do my students already use? If you haven't done this, you should, and I'll send you this on the email list. Give your students a brief survey. Are you using AI? Which tools are you using? What purposes are you using them for? What are your concerns around using AI? Are you afraid of it? Are you worried? Is it ethical or environmental? And what do you want to learn to do with AI? I gave that on the first day of class, and that has really informed my practice with my students. I encourage you to do the same. If you want it easy, you can just copy mine and I'll send it. Finally, when you're picking a tool, is it just a Chat GPT wrapper? Are they basically taking a pre-existing AI tool and slapping their logos and their color on it, and it's just using Chat GPT in the background? In other words, what does this tool do better than other LLMs? What's it do better than Perplexity or Claude or Gemini? If it doesn't do anything necessarily better or different, then why would we use it? Because I'm tool agnostic. A high-level overview of the most common ones. You can pause the screen right here and take some notes. The short version is, if ChatGPT is open, it's probably one your students have used the most or have it on their phone. It can kind of do anything. If your school or university pays for it, that's amazing. They're probably going to make you use it. Microsoft Copilot is basically ChatGPT with different window dressing. The only time I would encourage anyone to use that is if you're really deep into the Microsoft Teams ecosystem and you're using all of their document and email tools. Even then, I probably still wouldn't use it. The same goes with Google Gemini, by the way. It doesn't really do anything better than the other tools other than integrate with Gmail and Google Docs and Slides. For the most part, I wouldn't recommend it. Anthropic's Claude is really good for certain uses, but it also lacks internet access and it doesn't have a voice mode. So I'm a fan. I do use it, but I would go with ChatGPT. The one exception is if you're doing research, any kind of citations or sourcing, Perplexity is amazing. Anecdote, it is my students' favorite AI tool. And when I let them pick their tool, which I often do, many of them use that as their default generative AI tool. So if you haven't used Perplexity, you should check it out. If you want one that's going to be more pre-made for you, these are the two most common ones for student-facing use. So let's say your school or district blocks ChatGPT and Claude. It doesn't let them get on the ones that I shared. These are probably more likely to be open. School AI, I encourage as a good starter tool. It's safe. You can monitor in real time what students are putting in chat logs. It has pretty effective ethical guardrails to keep them from having it do crazy, illegal, immoral things. And it's also pretty simple to use. It comes with some awesome pre-made things. Magic School is kind of the jack of all trades. Personally, I don't use it a lot, but it seems to be the starter tool of choice for many teachers. And it has a bunch of template tools that are set up for you that don't require a lot of prompting. My only issue with that is you're not learning one of the fundamental skills of prompting, but these are both good. You can't go wrong with either of them. Their free versions are great. A word of warning, though, is you don't want to get stuck behind the moat of a closed ecosystem. In the spring of 2024, I built some spaces. I had my students using School AI almost every day on every writing assignment. It was awesome. I came back, I didn't check, and in the fall of 2024, my district blocked it and I couldn't access any of the stuff I had built. That's how I learned to be tool agnostic. I hope you don't make the same mistake as me. So let's get to the skills. We know the policy, we have the tools, just pick one and go. If it's available and it's free, you can use it, it'll work fine. The first thing we have to be able to do is prompt. And when we use a vague prompt, it's instructions, we're going to get a vague output. This is the fundamental skill for AI use. So we need to be good enough at it to teach our students. You do that through using a framework. All of us use frameworks in our instruction, in our writing processes, in our content creation. You just want to have a task be simple, repeatable, consistent, and then sticky means it's memorable, but it's also applicable in other areas. It carries over to other things they do. My framework that I teach is just the one that my middle school teachers taught me how to write with. They called it rafting. Give it a role, tell it who the audience is, give it the format you want the output to be in, and then tell it the topic. We call this rafting a prompt instead of crafting a prompt. You can also just do your own. If you don't like mine or you have a different idea, it should be 3 to 5 components. Don't give them an 8-letter acronym. Being simple is better than being perfect. There's always extra things you could add on, but the reason I like Raft is everyone can remember it and it'll get you there most of the way. Make sure yours is sticky, and think about how phone numbers work. They're broken into strings of 3 to 4 digits for a reason. That's how our memory works. So use 3 to 5 letters in your prompt framework. An example of what that looks like when a student rafts a prompt, I might go in and say, okay, I need you to teach me this. So your role, ChatGPT, is an expert world history teacher specializing in this area. All the examples I'm going to continue to give are about the Sepoy Rebellion from my world history curriculum, just so we have a common thread. Then I tell it who this is for. In this case, it's me, the student. I'm in that class and I want to get an A on this rubric, and I paste it in. The format, how I want it to look when it spits it out, is the outline of a research paper. I don't want it to write it for me. And then my topic is, I want you to help me evaluate the primary source reliability on these causes of the Sepoy Rebellion. That's very specific. Google says the average prompt it gets is 7 to 9 words. This is way more specific and going to give us a more specific output. So tell me in the chat, what's a prompt framework you have used, you remember? Do you teach your own? Whether you've had your students use it or not, just share a prompt framework and tell us what does it stand for and what are the components of it. If you don't have one, Raft is awesome and you should start using it. The next skill after prompting, we need to figure out what are the research skills and how does that work with AI? I have a simple rule for you. If the tool you're using can access the internet and it can help you generate citations from those articles and websites it's finding, then you can use it for research. My favorite, Perplexity, like we mentioned in the tool section. It's also my students' favorite. Here's a screenshot of an actual search that my students were doing on the Sepoy Rebellion. You can even generate the art to fit. You can search for just videos on YouTube about a topic. It can give you summaries. It can help you generate citations in Chicago or APA or MLA style. It is awesome. The reason it works, it can access the internet, Claude can't, and it can generate citations. So your students can use it for research. What about the application of this? So I'm just saying instead of a Google search, I use Perplexity. Well, the first thing you have to know is which type of research do you want students to use the AI tool? Open or closed? If we want it to look out on the internet, that's what we call an open search. Again, here's a real screenshot. This was from Search GPT. ChatGPT can give you links. They're not always the best. It's not my favorite tool, but the free version can do this. If you say, go outside and find a source that's not provided in this document, you see worldhistory.org, Bing, Britannica, and then it can help me generate citations. So if I'm telling it to go look out on the World Wide Web, that's an open search. The other way that I can use AI tools for research is what's called a closed search. I can feed in the sources that I already looked up or that my teacher assigned me into the AI tool. Here's a prompt from one of my students. And then it can look inside there for a quotation or help me evaluate its reliability or give me a summary. So instead of turning it loose on the internet, I'm focusing it in to the document or the link that I gave it. The next way we have to be able to teach students, besides prompting and researching, is to write with AI. This is maybe controversial, the methods that I teach, that there are 3 different ways that you can write with AI. You can use AI as a feedback agent, which is definitely what you should start with. The last mile, where the AI does an initial setup and then I iterate on its output. And then the highest level, which I don't do with students at all, and I don't think you should either, at least right away, is replacement, where the AI creates the entire product just based on my prompt. It's a high level skill, and it's probably not what you want your students doing. So how do we apply this? If I'm giving my students this assignment, here's the one we've seen all the examples from, I have to be explicit in how I want them to or not to use AI tools. This is the scale. AI enhanced means I'm going to do it with AI. It's not going to do it for me, but I can use it in these ways. And you'll notice I put on every assignment, I need a disclosure statement and a link to your chat. If you don't do that, you get a 0 until you do or you redo it. Here's an example of a student using AI as a feedback agent. They put in a prompt saying, hey, I already wrote this. Can you help me use more strong adjectives to spruce it up a little bit? Here's the source. The AI didn't write it. The AI is iterating on the human content. That's a feedback agent. So some ways you should think about this. When I go into my classroom, how am I going to use AI? It's not to use it for its own sake, but it's to do things like remove friction. So if research on Google search and looking out on the search engines you traditionally have, maybe your students use Wikipedia, you don't want them to, that's an area I want to remove friction. We don't want to remove all friction, but we want to remove unnecessary friction. You can use it to brainstorm ideas and just say, how could I approach this? Give me 5 different ways to write it. You can have students create things they otherwise couldn't. You could do a poem, a narrative. You could have students come up with a dialogue between historical figures and they feed in the sources. And maybe the most powerful one is your students can use it for feedback. In fact, most of them probably are using it because they don't want to wait for the human who's drowning in papers to grade, who won't look at it for a week or two, and they want instant feedback now. AI can do that. You just need to be intentional and make sure that you have the policies in place, the tools that you and your students can access, and you've built the fundamental skills to be able to apply those. I would like to hear in the chat, now that we're at the last slide, what's your biggest question that you still have? Was there something you're hoping to hear about scaffolding student-facing AI tools into your classroom practice? Is there something now that you heard, you're like, oh man, I never thought of that and I'm confused? What's your biggest question that you have at this point? Please put it in the chat below. If you haven't done so, you can take a picture of that QR code, just pull out your phone, open your camera app, and it should send you to a landing page. You just put in your name and email. I will make sure that you get a copy of the slides and the video of this recording for your own purposes. Do whatever you want with it. And then over the next week, I will send you examples from AI policies, syllabi, including my own, links to chats that my students wrote. They're anonymous. There's no data like names on them. Example lessons that you can have students get started on writing with AI. And then I want you to have my contact info. If you have a question, a concern, you don't have a policy in place, or you want someone at your school or university to be able to connect with me, you'll have my email and my social media contact, and you can get in touch with me anytime. I'm flattered that I got to be a part of the Skilling Future AI in Action Conference. I hope these are more tools than stories of how you can reshape K-20 education. Thank you. I'm your host, Aaron Makelky. Have a great rest of your weekend.